Right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Unique Adult Experience webinar. My name is Kelly Helm, and I am the Manager of Patient Engagement for NephCure. Before we get started here, I'm just going to give everyone a couple more minutes to log on. All right, we'll go ahead and get started, and people can kind of jump in as they log on here. Before we dive into the webinar, I just want to remind everyone of NephCure's focus, which is to engage a community of patients with nephrotic syndrome and FSGS, their caregivers, clinicians, scientists, and also the biopharmaceutical industry to raise and leverage support that leads to better treatments and faster cures. Just a few housekeeping items before I introduce our guest speaker. We would love for this to be an interactive webinar. So if you have a question or would like to comment, you can either raise your hand by clicking on the little hand icon on your webinar toolbar, which is at the top right of your screen, or you can also type your question by clicking on it either says questions or there's a little question mark icon also on your toolbar. And I do have everyone muted at the moment to cut back on feedback, but if you do raise your hand, I will unmute you so everyone will be able to hear you and you will be able to share or ask your questions at that point. All right.
I'm not seeing the hand for raising your hand. It's in the top right-hand corner, you said?
Yes, Dean, and I think that's because you're a panelist. You see the panelist.
Okay.
Panelist.
Okay. That's fine.
All
right.
That's
fine. Okay.
So with that, let's get started. Something we hear time and time again from our patient population is just how important it is to find support from others who can relate and who have been through what they are experiencing. So we thought it would be a good idea and helpful to have an adult patient share a bit of her journey and also allow time for others to share and ask questions as well. So I would like to introduce to you our guest speaker this evening, Bernadine Watson, who is a FSGS patient who was diagnosed at the age of 33. She's a writer for Washington Post, and some of you may have read her recent article in the Washington Post that was published a few months ago titled Kidney Disease. I was only 33 years old and I felt fine. And so with that, Dean, I will let you kind of share the beginning of your story and how it came about that you were diagnosed with FSGS.
Okay. Hi, everybody. And I just want to make one clarification. I am a writer, and I'm a freelance writer. I do some writing for the Washington Post, but I'm not employed by the Washington Post. Okay. I was diagnosed at 33 years old. I went to the doctor and had just a routine physical, and I wasn't having any symptoms except a little fatigue, but the doctor found excess protein in my urine and told me that he thought I should see a nephrologist. I was in the middle of a divorce at the time. My son was about 13 years old, and and the last thing I wanted to hear was that I might have a serious disease. And originally I tried to sort of not ignore it, but I didn't take it very seriously. But then when I started to talk to the doctor more, and the doctor told me that it's possible that I could have kidney disease and it could lead to loss of kidney function, I went and saw a nephrologist who diagnosed me, well, who suggested that I see a specialist. And do you want me to go ahead and talk about my my biopsy, or at this point?
Sure.
Okay. Well, I saw a specialist. Actually, I went up. I was living in Minnesota at the time, and I went up to the Mayo Clinic, and I had a biopsy and was diagnosed with FSGS, focal segmental glomerular sclerosis. And I mean, it was a disease I had never heard of. I could barely pronounce it. There was no one in my family that had kidney disease, much less a disease with a name like that. And but I was told at the time that my prognosis was very good. I had some very minimal scarring in my kidney. And so I was 33, I guess that was about in 1984, and for many years, until about 1998, I really had almost no symptoms. My blood pressure climbed a little, and I was on blood pressure medication, but all I did was check in with the doctor periodically, and I seemed to really have no symptoms at all. And then in about 1999, I went to see the doctor, and they did the general urinalysis and blood work, and I'll never forget the words the doctor said: your creatinine level is creeping up. And I went back to the nephrologist, who told me that in about, they thought in the next year I would either be on dialysis or need a kidney transplant. And that really was and I had my first transplant in 2000, which was many, many years after my initial diagnosis.
Very good. Thank you so much for sharing. What medications did you, after your biopsy, Dean, and your diagnosis with FSGS, what medications were you prescribed?
Well, it was before my transplant.
Yes. Yeah, like after your very biopsy.
Yeah, after the biopsy, the only medications I was on were blood pressure medications, and my cholesterol started to go up. I was also on cholesterol medications, but this was in the 1980s, and I was not really treated with anything to try and reduce the amount of protein in my urine. I just wasn't treated at all. I was just watched.
Interesting. I wonder if that's because you're kind of asymptomatic, you didn't have swelling, that type of thing.
No, I didn't. I had I was stable for a number of years.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, we had a question from Kathy that was interested in hearing how the Mayo Clinic treated you, as to compare it to her treatment in Connecticut. But obviously it sounds like they just put you on probably you said blood pressure medicines. I'm assuming maybe an ACE inhibitor is sometimes used to proteinuria.
Yeah, something like Vasotec. I'm not sure if that's an ACE inhibitor, but that's what I recall. I think that at the time my creatinine level was still was still pretty low, even though I did have some scarring in my kidney. Mm-hmm. And I did not, so I wasn't really, I wasn't treated to any degree. And I will never forget, I still have the letter from the doctor who I saw there who said that my prognosis was very good and that they really didn't think that, that I had, that anything else was going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But that was, it took some years, but that was not the case. I've had, as my doctor today says, a pretty good dose of FSGS.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And Diane had a question. If you remember, after your initial biopsy, how much protein were you spilling?
I don't remember.
Okay. I would assume probably not a whole lot if you weren't having swelling and other symptoms.
That's right. I think that it probably was not a lot.
Okay. Very good. And we also have, Kathy had another question. When your creatinine went up, as it crept up and you had that conversation with the doctor that your kidneys were failing, what did they do at that point?
Well, they started treating me with different, I think it was Vasotec, with different medications that reduce the amount of protein in your urine.
Mm-hmm.
And but not, and it would go down, and the amount of protein in my urine would get very, very low, but it just didn't stay low.
Right, okay. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Back and forth. Another question, what was your initial reaction to your diagnosis?
Well, initially it was disbelief, because I had always prided myself on being a healthy person. There is illness in my family. My father was a diabetic. My mother has had some heart issues, but I always tried to maintain a good weight. I was always athletic. I took very good care of myself, and I just could not believe that I had a serious disease. And I sort of, I think, fluctuated between being very, very bummed out about it and then deciding that I was going to believe the doctor at the Mayo Clinic that it really wasn't going to progress into very much. And I tried to go on with my life as usual. I had a very kind of responsible job, and I was traveling a lot, and I just kept up with my doctor's appointments, but I assumed that I was going to be fine. It was a big shock when I was told my creatinine was creeping up, because I still really didn't have physical symptoms that meant anything other than sometimes I was fatigued. I really didn't have the symptoms that told me that anything serious was going on. And let's see, I remember that my creatinine was, I'm going to say, about 10.
Oh, wow.
Before I went on dialysis that first time, before I had my first transplant.
Yeah, and I'll have you go into your transplant, this kind of your transplant journey here in just a second. But first,
Okay.
Micah has a question. Micah, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you so you can ask your question. Go ahead. You should be unmuted, Micah. Does she have audio? We can't hear you, Micah. If you want to go ahead and type your question in on the question panel, and I will read it out loud.
Okay.
And we'll come back to it. But thank you
All right.
for your hand, Micah. Okay, so why don't you go into, we have one other question about from Kathy about how you're doing now, but before we talk about that, why don't you go ahead and share just a little bit about your transplant journey and kind of how that came about.
Okay. Well, When my creatinine got pretty high, my doctor told me, the nephrologist told me that I was going to either have to go on dialysis or get a transplant. And I immediately began to talk to people in my family. It was also around the death of my father. And all of my family, I have 3 sisters and a brother, were home. I'm from Philadelphia. We were all at home for my father's funeral, and I talked to all of my siblings about the fact that, I was in a sort of a crisis of kidney failure. And all of my 3 sisters and my brother all got tested. And my older sister, who's 5 years older than me, decided that and everybody was a match. But my older sister decided that because she was the oldest, she would be my donor. And she was also not working at the time, and my other sisters and my brother were. So I had to go. I was, let's say, this was at the end of the year in 1999, right around Christmas time. My sister came down. Let me see. She lives in New York. She came to Philadelphia, begun the testing. I was on dialysis for about 3 months, which was a huge shock. It was a huge shock. I remember just going to the doctor once, and I didn't know that was the day I was going to get the shunt in my arm, and the doctor just gave me a prescription and told me to go to this office, and I went, and I was by myself even, and I got the port put into not in my arm, in my neck that time. And I had to call somebody to come and get me. I was extremely upset because the doctor just didn't communicate to me what was going to happen. And that was maybe in January, and I had my first transplant from my sister in March of 2000. That my sister was a perfect match. That kidney only lasted 4.5 years before the FSGS returned.
Okay.
And I don't know if there's anybody else on the call that has FSGS, but that is one of the things that can happen with that disease. Should I keep going? Because I've had 2 transplants.
Yeah.
Does anybody have questions?
I have a quick question. Did your FSGS return? Sorry, I skipped ahead on the slides, but we'll move forward here in just a minute. Did your first transplant, did the recurrent FSGS show up right away, or did it wait until 4 years after to come back?
Yeah, it came back. Let's see. I was okay with good readings for a couple of years.
Okay.
And then at about the 3rd year or so, my creatinine levels started creeping up again. I started getting swelling. So it was about 4 years after my transplant that I had kidney failure again.
Okay. And then did you go back on dialysis, or did you have a
Yes. No, I was on dialysis for 5 years.
Okay.
After that. Excuse me?
Hemodialysis?
I was on hemodialysis, yes.
Okay. I have a quick question here from Kathy, who just had rituximab infusions and been on steroids for 4 years, and she was just wondering how you were able to get dialysis or a transplant. Was your GFR below 15? I'm assuming with if your creatinine was a 10, then I'm sure your GFR was pretty low. Do you remember what your GFR was?
I don't remember. But what she's asking me about how I was able to get a dialysis?
Yeah, just kind of what the process was like. It sounds kind of like you just went in one day and they said, well, your numbers are low. We're going to start dialysis tomorrow. Was that kind of?
Well, it really, let's see, I was seeing a doctor. They were monitoring me. I had moved to, I was living in Washington, D.C. By this time, I had gotten married. They were monitoring me for how quickly my creatinine was rising.
Mhm.
And it was getting higher. I don't remember how high it was by the time I had to go on dialysis, but I was starting to get sick. My face was puffy, and I still was only being treated with blood pressure medications. I wasn't being treated with anything for trying to treat the kidney disease at all. My face was getting puffy. I was having a lot of diarrhea because I was still taking the anti-rejection medicines because I still had my my transplanted kidney, but it was failing.
Okay.
And then I got to the point where the doctors were going to bring me in to start dialysis, but I got really sick one night where I could not. I had to be rushed to the emergency room,
Mm-hmm.
and at the emergency room, they ended up. I was kind of delirious. I guess I just had a lot of junk in my system.
Mm-hmm.
And they admitted me, and I got dialysis. They weren't able to get a port in me right away because my other one had been shut down since after I got my first kidney, and they gave me dialysis in my groin area as an emergency case.
Mm-hmm.
And then I guess I was in over the next couple of days, I got a catheter in my neck
Mm-hmm.
for dialysis, and I started dialysis, um, at the end of 2004. And I started a 3-day-a-week, 3.5 hour a day process of dialysis.
Okay. And
Mm-hmm.
and two more questions here. Were you diagnosed with primary FSGS or secondary? It sounds to me like primary, correct?
Yes, that's what they believe. That it's primary. They don't think. I don't have lupus. I don't have diabetes. I don't have anything else um, that would trigger the FSGS. So I think that's what they call primary.
Okay. And Mike would also like to know if you ever had genetic testing done specifically for the MYH9 gene.
I have not.
Okay.
I have not. I the only I don't know if you're ready to go to the chat, but I did when I met Dr. Kopp at NIA. Do you want to go there?
Yeah, we can skip ahead.
Okay. When I decided, it took me a long time to decide to write the piece that I had in the Washington Post. I just did not want to be that public about my own personal life. But I decided that for my own purposes, it was part of sort of my own way of dealing with having this disease. I decided to write about it in the health section of the Post. And in doing the research for it, I came into contact with Dr. Cobb at NIH. And when I went to interview him for the article, I ended up, through him, doing some testing for a gene, and I'm not going to remember the name of it, but I wrote about it in the article. It's been a while. It's the APOL1 gene that a lot of African American people carry, that they think could be responsible for the prevalence of FSGS in African Americans.
Okay.
So I did give tissue and blood for that. Yes, I don't know yet if I do have that gene.
Okay. Very good. And what kind of just a couple more questions while we're on the topic of Dr. Cobb at NIH. What were your initial thoughts about how research was going?
Well, I don't know how many people get to go to NIH. I felt very privileged to be able to do it, and he was very, very open and took a lot of time with me, both for the article I was writing and personally. But I was very impressed with how much work is actually going on about nephrotic syndrome, because you have this disease and you think it's rare and that you're the only one that has it. Nobody's ever heard of it before, and you feel very kind of isolated about it. But when I went to NIH and I saw all of these people really, researchers that were from all over the world that had come to NIH to work on at least FSGS and I think other nephrotic syndrome related diseases, it made me very, very happy to see it happening. And the fact that they had discovered this gene in people from Africa and other kind of Mediterranean countries, that it could explain why so many people of African American and other descent and other darker people, might have this, because I mean FSGS is it's very high among African Americans, and it just made me feel like there was a reason for why this was happening in my life, rather than it just being some weird thing that had happened in my body. So I was impressed that they were making progress with the research, and Dr. Cobb seemed to think that in the next 3 to 5 years they might have a medication that would at least try to keep the disease from recurring in people.
Very good. And we had real quick a question about what is NIH, and I just wanted to say really quick, NIH stands for the National Institute of Health. And
sorry, using acronyms.
We didn't explain that very well on our slide either, but it's basically a research facility located in Maryland. It's a government agency, biomedical research facility. So
it's really the top health organization in the country, and in some ways the world. I mean, everybody wants to be there, and the top, a lot of the top researchers are there. They get a lot of government money to do a lot of research. The big minds are there, and they look at a lot of the sort of rare and very difficult diseases. And they also often have trials. And I think you can go on their website, or if anybody is interested in Dr. Cobb's email, because he's very open to talking with people, all I did was email him. I mean, you can, he may hand you off to an assistant or someone to get information about what trials they're doing. There might be something there that might be of interest to you.
Yeah, and we can, we'll follow up with an email after this webinar and get you all of this information as well. As you can always go on clinicaltrials.gov to look at any clinical trials happening out there, and you can search nephrotic syndrome or FSGS, and they'll all pop up. But I will for sure follow up with Dr. Kopp's information, as well as how you can find research. And we also have a page on NephCure's website that will guide you to specific research clinical trials going on for nephrotic syndrome and FSGS. So let's go back, Dean, to this previous slide here and talk about kind of what it's been like living with nephrotic syndrome. Can you describe a typical day for you right now and after diagnosis, and how you balanced work life with health?
It can be a lot. I think I carry FSGS not just around with me in my body because there is no cure, but just around with me all of the time in my head and my body. And I have to find ways to sort of normalize my life, or else I think sometimes it could take over my entire life. So in terms of balancing my life, one, I have a lot of support in my life. I have and I think that's really, really is very important. I have a very supportive husband. He, in fact, was involved with my second transplant. He didn't give the kidney directly to me. We participated in a kidney chain. I don't know if people know what that is, where it was done at Johns Hopkins, and where they, if you have a donor that's not compatible with you, they can give a kidney into a pool, and somebody will get their kidney, and you can get one that's compatible. So he was involved in helping me get a kidney. He was very involved in helping me get to dialysis and back every day, and it's just been a critical support for me. So support in my life on a day-to-day basis is really important. Another thing is I decided after my second transplant that I would not go back to a standard job. And I know everybody is not in that situation, but I was fortunate enough to not have to work a 9-to-5 job. And I did that because I just felt like I needed to have more time to take care of myself. I wanted to make myself and my health a priority. So I do work. I'm a writer, and I write for various organizations. And as I said earlier, I write from time to time for the Washington Post. But I'm also able to structure my time and my days so that I can take a nap if I get tired. I cannot work a day if I don't, if I need to. I have, as you probably know, there's lots of doctor's appointments. There's also keeping up with your medications and all the things that you have to do to make sure you stay on track with the disease. And I just felt like having to meet the requirements of a 9-to-5, or, if you have a very strenuous job, it's certainly more than 9-to-5, but of a regular position. So I decided that I do without, I do with less money and try to preserve my health. I've always been someone that is physically fit and interested in physical exercise, but I take yoga classes 3 or 4 times a week. I try to walk as much as I can. I really have made exercise a priority in my life, really for 2 reasons. One is my health. Prednisone will help, will sort of make it easy for you to gain weight, so the exercise certainly helps there. But also, I feel better when I feel like I'm in good shape and I'm satisfied with my appearance. It's just a psychological boost. Even though I'm dealing with this disease, but I can try to look and be at my best. That is really helpful to me. Because mentally it can get you down. I feel, I've got scars on my arms. My arm I had from my dialysis. I had a great big fistula scar. So there were different things I didn't wear. I've got the scar from where my catheter was because of prednisone. My cheeks are kind of full. So I try to do as much as I can to feel like I look well, and that just makes a big difference to me. I have very good friends that that play a big role in my life. I let some friends go that I felt like were causing me more stress than others. But the friends that I do have are very dear, and I'm able to confide in them about what's going on. But at the same time, I know I don't. We have a normal relationship, and they don't want to hear me whining all the time. So they help me kind of balance things. I have a son and a granddaughter and my son's wife, and I try to, my family is close, and that's also a great support for me. So I've tried to structure my life to be as normal as possible, but while at the same time making sure that I allow myself the time, the resources, and the support to be realistic about the fact that I do have a chronic illness and I do have to take care of myself.
I have one question. Just
okay.
Back to life on dialysis. Kathy was wondering if you were able to work full-time while on dialysis.
Well, the first year I was on dialysis, I actually went on disability.
Okay.
And it was not my doctor had to sign for me to be able to do it. And people will often say to me, you don't look sick, you don't look, like you've been sick a day in your life. And my doctors, I think, were sort of invested in the idea that, people can have a normal life and be on dialysis. And they really, this doctor in particular, I remember, really did not want to see me go on disability. And I felt like, one, that I had worked for that money. That was and two, I needed it. I was tired. I had 2 kidney failures in my life, and I wasn't I'm 64 now. I wasn't 60 years old. I was 50 years old yet. I needed to rest. I needed to not have the stress of a job. Now, again, I know that because this disability is not a lot of money, and I know everybody can't do that. But I had to get over the psychological issues around going on disability because I've worked since I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
But also, and going to that degree to take care of myself, I just had to um, follow my mind and decide that that was something that I needed to do. And I was on disability for a year, and then I went back to consulting. I didn't go back to a full-time job. I went back to consulting, but I was traveling for work. I was in consulting. I was writing for different people, and sometimes I had to travel to cover stories and write about issues. So I would say I was maybe three-quarter time.
Okay.
What was interesting? What was interesting about that? If you want me to stop, I can.
Go ahead.
Okay. Was that dialysis has a very strict schedule. The centers have a strict schedule, and that you're supposed to do your 3 hours during that session, and either the morning or the afternoon, and they want you to stay on the schedule they set. But because I was working, I often had to, change the schedule around a bit. Never very much, because, you still need to get your 15 or 20 or however many hours you're supposed to.
Right.
But it's sort of, they like it to be controlled. And I was always going in and say, oh, instead of in the morning, I got to come in the afternoon. And they were sick of me. but I felt like the system should be there to support me and what I needed to do, and actually working was on my own terms was good for me.
Yeah.
It was for me to feel like I was making a contribution to my household. It was good for me to feel like I was doing something to take care of myself. I would get dressed and get on a train and go to work, and it was good. It was an upper in many ways, as long as I was in control. And I also my husband and I would travel, even though we couldn't leave the country because, dialysis is paid for primarily by Medicare. Mm-hmm. And so, I went to dialysis in a number of different states around the country, and you're supposed to be able to do it, and so I would arrange it through the travel supports that these dialysis centers have. But they were always happier when you followed the rules that made it easier for the system. But I think when you have a chronic disease, you have to do what you need to do for yourself to live your life.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you were and are a huge advocate for yourself. Although it's not always fun to have to advocate for yourself, it's your life, and it sounds like you had the right balance of being an advocate and sticking to the system. Kathy said her neighbor mentioned that dialysis was like a part-time job, which it definitely can be for sure.
Yeah, I think that's.
Yes.
And there were times when I was wiped out. There were times when I got sick at dialysis. Mm-hmm. I mean, they can take too much fluid off of you, and you get cramps or you throw up, this can be a very humbling experience. Mm-hmm. But it comes with the territory, and you sort of learn that the disease is not that you're just a messed up person.
Yeah. And another question, I know at one point you were on prednisone. Can you go into that a little bit more in detail, how that affects you?
Yeah. After my transplant, after both transplants, but I'll just talk about the latest one since, it's the most relevant. After my transplant, I've been on 3 medications. I've been on prednisone and Cellcept, and they might have different names, and Prograf or tacrolimus. And prednisone does seem to be the one that I and others had the most difficulty with. I am on the lowest dose that they will allow me to be on, and that's 2.5 milligrams. And I asked to be on the lowest dose possible to at least try it, because I knew from my previous transplant that it was going to make me very puffy and jittery. And so like I said, I'm on 2.5 milligrams, and it's a low dose, but still, it's better now, but it can make me very anxious. I have a slight tremor in my hand. At one time when I was first on, after my second transplant, first being on prednisone, I was on anti-anxiety medication because I could not drive. I would get so anxious. And this is on a low dose. And it does have that impact on you. I have a roll of fat around my stomach. No matter how much I exercise, it doesn't go away. I have, I have my puffy cheeks. But I mean, I think I'm more aware of the impact on my face than other people. It's just that I notice it because I know I'm on prednisone. But it definitely has an impact on on the body, and I know that other people have suffered with it much more than I have. Sometimes I'll look down, and especially if I've been sitting for a while on an airplane, you do retain some fluid with prednisone. So I call it a nasty little pill. It's a nasty little pill.
Putting it. Somebody else had commented in the remarks here that prednisone is the devil's friend. So.
Oh yeah, it really is. And I understand that they're starting to do transplants and not putting people on prednisone afterwards. It's like an advance in the field because prednisone is so bad. But because this is my second transplant, they don't want to chance it, and I have to take it.
Yeah. Do you follow a special diet to kind of help with the weight gain and also with kidney health?
Well, once you have your transplant, you're supposed to be able to eat whatever you want because, dialysis is a very rigid diet.
Right.
Because kidneys are not working and they can't process, your body can't process all the stuff that is in regular food. But now I pretty much eat, I try to eat what would be called a healthy diet. I do watch my calories, but I can't say I'm on any special diet. I just try to cut fat or eat healthy fats like olive oil instead of other kinds of oil. I try not to eat a lot of sweets because I also want to keep my sugar down because prednisone does raise your sugar levels. And I try to drink a lot of fluids, which keeps me hydrated, which helps keep your creatinine level down. I just try to eat healthily and exercise. It is difficult to control your weight, but if I find my weight kind of creeping up, then I use one of those little calorie counters, and I will just it's called MyFit or something like that, and I will count my calories on my it's on my phone until I feel I've come down those 1 or 2 pounds. I have to say it's something that's always with me. I'm always thinking about my diet. I don't mean a diet, but my eating habits and my weight, because I do know that it could get out of control from the prednisone, and I don't, I don't want my blood pressure to be higher than it needs to be. I try to watch my salt also. But you know what? Last night, my husband and I were out at a party, and we both came home and piled into bed and ate ice cream and looked at the basketball game.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you just got to be a normal person. But for the most part, I do try to eat a very healthy diet.
Good. Very good.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody had asked if you were on a low salt diet or a fluid restriction. I'm assuming since you're post-transplant that the fluid restriction became a fluid minimum.
Yeah, I don't have a fluid restriction. I did when I was on dialysis. But now, post-transplant, I don't really have a fluid restriction, and I don't have a salt restriction. I'm just told, to stay under 1,200 milligrams. I can't remember exactly, but I just don't use table salt at all, and I try to not eat salty food. So I can't say I count salt milligrams, but I do try to eat a low salt diet.
Okay. And we're kind of nearing an end, which is great because this has been very interactive, and I appreciate everyone's questions and remarks. And although I'm not getting to every single one, I would love after the webinar to put you in touch with Dean, and I'm sure Dean would be happy to chat with you via email or the phone and answer your questions specifically. I just, real quick before we run out of time, Dean, can you kind of tell everyone, we got to your second transplant, but we never talked about how your second transplant went and how you're doing now, kidney-wise.
Okay. Well, my second transplant went well. As I told you, I got a kidney. My husband gave a kidney to someone that he still does not know, and but that person was compatible with. I got a kidney from a woman who was what they call an altruistic donor. She just went to Hopkins one day and said she wanted to be a kidney donor. And at the time, I did not know her because it's very confidential. But I left a note at the hospital and asked them to give a note to my donor, and I thanked her. And I told her if she ever wanted to get in touch, I left my information, and she emailed me. We've since become friends. One of the things that we find so ironic is my sister, who was my perfect match, the kidney only lasted 4 years, and the woman who was my second donor, the altruistic donor, is a white woman that I didn't know from anyone. And let me see, I got the kidney in 2009, and this is 2015, so going on 6 years, and my creatinine level is 1.2, and it kind of stays around there, and I'm doing very well.
Very good, which is so great to hear.
Doing very well. I will say one last thing, and that is, once you've had the FSGS return, that possibility never leaves you.
Mm-hmm.
And while I try to live a very hopeful, happy, life, I'm also trying to prepare myself for the possibility that it could come back again. And, I think about how will I handle that, because I'm not certain that I would get another transplant. I'll be 65 next year.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, I just don't know what the issues would be beyond if my second kidney fails. So that would mean that I'd be back on dialysis, and I do think about that. I don't obsess about it, but I try to be realistic about the fact that, it could happen.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very good point. And
Yeah.
I appreciate you being honest with that, because it's something, we work with a lot of parents, and that's not really a question with kids. But as adults, as you get older, these are situations where the decision becomes even more difficult. And
Yeah.
we've been talking about that in some of the comments too, just the fact of, do people want to put themselves through that? One more question that I do want to touch on, because Kathy, I think it's a really good question. She would like to know, how did you feel on dialysis and with the transplant? Did the transplant really make that much of a difference, or I guess, was it worth it to you to have both of you?
Oh, there's no comparison. The transplant was definitely worth it. In terms of, I think physically, psychologically, definitely worth it. On dialysis, first of all, I lost a lot of weight while I was on dialysis. One, your diet is restricted, and I think on the machine it takes a little bit of weight off you, not just the fluid, but a little bit more. And in some ways, I know it might sound perverse, but I was happy. I was tiny. I was like a size 2, and I was, I'm so thin. But I was also not in the best health. A lot of things can go wrong when you're on dialysis. And so a couple times my fistula got infected. You have to go and get it cleaned out. It's always, you're in a much more delicate state of health while you're on dialysis. Now, that doesn't, I think I was as healthy as I could be. I followed the diet. I didn't go over the restrictions on fluids. I tried to travel, but you are you're fragile, much more. I felt much more fragile, mentally and physically on dialysis, and you're around this sickness and a lot of sick people all the time, and it's hard to be mentally healthy, or at least I found it so.
Yeah.
There's certainly challenges with the transplant, but I feel much healthier. My time, which is a very, very, it's the most precious commodity you have, is I have those 15, so, those 12 hours a week, I have it back. I feel, healthier, stronger. I think that it was definitely worth it to have the transplant. And I think if you trust your doctors, and, some people just don't want to go through that surgery, but I did not find the surgery to be extremely taxing. I also prepared myself. I tried to get as healthy as I could before I had the transplant surgery.
Very good.
If I could, I'd do it again. I mean, if I needed to. But I think there's some issues. There's some ethical issues. How many kidneys do I want to take up,
Right.
And I don't, can my body go through it again? I'm in very good condition, but am I older, too old for it? I don't know.
Well, hopefully you won't have to cross that bridge anytime soon.
Well, I certainly hope so. I certainly hope so.
And with that too, I just on this final slide here, I know we kind of touched on it, not necessarily specifically, but we're kind of running low on time here. But I just want to touch on the point where you talk about educating those around you to help bring understanding and awareness to your condition. And Dean, I just want to share with you a comment from one of the attendees thanking you for writing your article, because she was able to share that article with her family members, and they kind of had a clearer understanding of what she was going through with FSGS.
Good.
And,
Good. I'm so glad.
And yeah,
I'm so glad. Yeah, because, you know, I mean, I think that people just don't, I think there's not a lot of awareness about FSGS. When you say cancer to someone, people get that.
Mm-hmm.
But often, you know, people don't get FSGS, or they just are not, you know, they need to be sensitized about the fact that you're living with this day in and day out, and you must, you know, take care of yourself, and you need their support. And I'm so glad that it was helpful.
Good. And we just want to thank you here at NephCure too for your time and being so open and being willing to share. And as we, just in closing, since we're running short on time and I do want to respect everybody's time, we will follow up with an email tomorrow regarding those few things that we talked about, like Dr. Kopp's email and research initiatives. Also, if you have questions that you think of later this evening, please feel free to shoot me an email, and I will either forward that on to Dean or get you in touch with her. I know she'd be happy to chat with you after this webinar, but I just want to thank all of our attendees too for being so open and willing to ask questions and share your experiences. So again, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Dean, for being so open and willing to share, and I hope everyone has a blessed holiday season, and hopefully we'll hear from you via email, or feel free to give us a call too. And on our next webinar as well in the new year, we'll have a whole new series. So
thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.